A quiet town is shaken by the news of a brutal murder. A caring mother died in her own home at the hands of a true monster. He did not seem to think he would be caught, nor did he care about witnesses who had seen him at the crime scene. The investigators wanted to create a psychological profile of the murderer, but they had no clues pointing to him. Then the second victim appeared. Day by day, the murderer became bolder. Would a team of experts from various states manage to find and arrest the serial killer before it was too late? In the middle of the United States, in the state of Kansas, lies the city of Newton. This city, with around 2,000 inhabitants, is surrounded by wheat and cornfields. There, religious families live who are always ready to help in difficult moments. When walking down the street, one could often see that half of the houses had their doors open, and that was normal. The townspeople trusted each other completely. But in the spring of 1994, an unprecedented evil entered the city through those open doors. Friday, May 20th, 1994, at 3:20 p.m., Anna McNeil arrived at Ronda Creel's house to pick up her daughter Gwen. Gwen was playing with Ronda's 5-year-old daughter Net. However, no one opened the door. After waiting for a while, Anna drove home and tried calling Ronda to find out where Gwen was, but no one answered. Anna sensed something was wrong, as Ronda always answered the phone and was always at home. The woman became extremely worried and called Ronda's husband. He worked in the neighboring town of Visita. The husband called one of Ronda's brothers-in-law, Kevin, and asked him to check if everything was okay. Kevin immediately drove to their house. The first thing he saw was the handbag containing all her belongings. Then he heard screams coming from the second floor. They were Natalie and her friend, screaming. When Kevin got upstairs, he discovered that the girls had been locked in the closet. After freeing them, he asked what had happened. Natalie could only say that a bad uncle had hit her mother. Kevin immediately dialed the number from the landline phone. The dispatcher told him to wait outside and not enter any other rooms. Kevin quickly led the girls out of the house. Minutes later, investigator T. Walton of the Newton Police Department arrived at the crime scene. As soon as he entered the house, he went directly to the bedroom, where he found the lifeless body of Ronda Creel on the bed. Her hands and feet had been tied with stockings at the ankles, covered in her blood, and one eye was swollen. The investigator had no idea what caused her death. He assumed she had been shot in the head, but he was not sure. The victim's mouth had been closed off with a white sock, and the killer had placed tape over it. Walton was certain the killer had left footprints in the room. It did not look like a robbery. Only 2 drawers were open, which contained socks. Nylon stockings and tape were also found there. Everything the perpetrator had used to tie up the murdered woman was taken from the room itself. Whoever committed this crime had arrived with light luggage and used improvised means. Under the bed, the investigator found what was perhaps the most important piece of evidence: a pair of aviator sunglasses that probably fell off when Ronda struggled with the murderer and rolled under the bed. Hoping to find fingerprints, Walton put the sunglasses in a bag and handed them over to the forensics team. A few minutes later, State's Attorney Mary McDonald arrived. When she stepped into the bedroom, she was presented with a gruesome sight. The victim lay diagonally across the bed and wore no underwear. The bed showed signs of a struggle. The bedding was wrinkled, and there were blood spatters and stains on the walls and on the bed. Mary McDonald had the impression that the killer had carried out all his actions in complete peace of mind. The signature of this crime was shameless. It happened in broad daylight, in a residential area with houses all around, children in the next room, and yet the killer did not seem to care at all about the possibility of getting caught. It was obvious that he had committed crimes before. He knew how to use violence and force the victim to comply. The investigators combed through the house in search of clues. T. Walton examined the front yard and noticed several cigarette butts on the lawn near the large front window. He found no ashtray in the house and suspected the killer had left those cigarette butts there. Perhaps he had watched Ronda before the attack. Stalkers are known to break in, steal, rape, and eventually kill their victims. In 1994, DNA analysis techniques were still in their infancy. The investigators did not know whether they could find fingerprints on the cigarette butts and on the glasses, but they were sure they could get a description of the murderer. Walton decided to talk to Natalie and her friend, who were in the house when Ronda was attacked. The girls said they had been sitting on high stools eating ice cream. At that moment, someone knocked at the door. Ronda went to see who it was. When she came back, a stranger followed her. Natalie said the man was tall and slim, with long dark hair, and he wore a red baseball cap on his head. Ronda then said, "You girls stay here, I'll be right back," and went into the bedroom with the stranger. This was very unusual. According to Natalie, her mother never took guests there, especially not to that part of the house. The girl remembered that it seemed strange to her at the time, but she was only a child, and her parents had many acquaintances she did not know, so she did not pay much attention to what was happening. A few minutes passed, the children got bored, and Natalie decided to ask her mother for permission to play outside. She went into the hallway and saw this stranger standing there alone. Natalie asked where her mother was, but the man said nothing. She ran to her mother's room, opened the door, and saw Ronda lying tied up on the bed. Before Natalie could even blink, the stranger had locked her and her friend in the closet. They were terrified. Natalie then thought she heard gunshots. Imagine what the girls described in vivid detail. It is hard to imagine such cruelty. Children should be protected from such horrors. Walton decided that this perpetrator was a monster. No sane person would do such a thing. He knew he had to find the killer as quickly as possible, or someone else might suffer after Ronda. In the city of Newton, Kansas, someone had murdered the young mother Ronda Creel in cold blood in her own bedroom and locked her daughter and her daughter's friend in a closet. The killer became terribly angry and lost control. It was clear he wanted revenge for something. The officers suspected that Ronda had known her attacker and that they had had an argument. The first suspects who come to mind are, of course, the victim's partners. But Ronda's husband, Vaughn Cable, worked 50 kilometers away from Newton, and their daughter Natalie would definitely have recognized her father. At the crime scene, Vaughn Cable remained firm and did everything he could to assist with the investigation, answering every question. He said he had met Ronda in the late 70s at college, and they had never parted since. According to him, he knew immediately that he wanted to spend his entire life with her. Ronda was faithful to him, lovingly raised their children, and she was the wife he had always dreamed of. They married in the 80s and had 3 daughters. They were happy together, dancing in the kitchen, hugging, jumping on the trampoline, biking. In every interview, Natalie said she had great parents. So that she could spend more time with the children, Ronda left her job. She taught Sunday school, worked in Bible school, and in a kindergarten. She was a wonderful person, but the life of a beloved wife, mother, teacher, and friend was tragically cut short. Investigator Walton showed Vaughn the glasses that had been found under the bed. He confirmed that no one in the family owned such glasses. Walton then assumed that this piece of evidence belonged to Ronda's murderer. The same was true for the cigarette butts near the window. Vaughn assured him that no one in the family smoked, so Walton's suspicion that the murderer had left them behind was confirmed. The officers then sent their team to question the neighbors. They knocked on every door, went into every house, asking whether anyone had noticed anything unusual that day, if any stranger or suspicious person had come into the neighborhood. But no one had seen anything out of the ordinary that day. Usually, in a murder case, investigators have 48 hours to find a suspect. But 2 days had passed and they still had nothing. The next day, the autopsy results came back. The victim's body showed signs of a struggle but no signs of rape. According to the medical examiner, the killer wanted to rape Ronda but got distracted so often that he did not finish that part of his plan because he was in a hurry to escape. The autopsy revealed that he had hit the murdered woman more than 13 times on the head and in the face. That meant Natalie and her friend had not heard gunshots, but the sound of Ronda's skull being fractured by each new blow. The blows were delivered with a large, heavy object, probably a hammer. The murderer hit Ronda Creel's head multiple times with full force to unleash his anger. It was a cruel, unimaginable death. The medical examiner found no traces of the perpetrator on her body or on the socks he used to gag her. The sports socks were made of washed fabric, so there were no usable fingerprints, or the investigators simply failed to retrieve them. In any case, there were no traces. The same was true for the stockings. No fingerprints were found on the nylon. No traces were found on the cigarette butts either. The investigators' only hope remained the glasses that had fallen under Ronda's bed. The murderer's fingerprints might be lifted using the latest cyanoacrylate fuming technique. Cyanoacrylate is heated in a glass container. As it evaporates, the fumes settle on the object inside the container, in this case, the glasses. Even faint fingerprints become visible. Fuming is a quick method, producing visible results after about 10 minutes. Unfortunately, there were no prints on the lenses. The investigators were almost ready to give up. They started going over the case file again to see if they had missed anything. When reading Kevin's statement, Kevin was the husband of one of Ronda's sisters. Walton noticed certain parts of his story did not match up, starting with the moment he entered the house. What was the first thing he took out of her handbag? That was strange. Then he found the girls, who told him a man had been hitting Ronda in the bedroom. Kevin was in training to be a nurse. If he knew Ronda was injured, why did he not go to her room, open the door, and see how she was? He did not even try to help her, and that was suspicious. The investigators asked Kevin to take a lie detector test. He agreed. Everything went fine until he was asked why he did not try to help Ronda. He said that when he reached for the doorknob to her bedroom, something told him not to open the door and not to enter the room, as if an angel had whispered to him not to. The investigators did not understand his strange words and asked Kevin what kind of relationship he had with the murdered woman. What was Ronda like? She was very sweet, beautiful, and sexy. The investigators demanded an explanation. Kevin said he was tired and had worked a long shift, and he did not know what he was saying. They asked if he could have killed Ronda. He replied, "I don't know." Walton's colleagues concluded from his answers that he was the murderer, supposedly obsessed with Ronda, who had rejected him, so he decided to force his will on her at all costs. But Walton saw a major flaw in that theory. Kevin might have done something odd, said something stupid, and acted differently than others in his situation. However, Natalie said she had seen a stranger. They were a close-knit family, uncles and aunts all connected. Kevin was not a stranger. He belonged to the family, which meant the police's version was incorrect. Walton decided to speak with Kevin outside the station, so he would not feel pressured and might reveal the truth. Kevin realized he was under suspicion of murder and refused to speak further, hiring a lawyer. The situation was hopeless. The investigators could not continue questioning him, and the police had no other suspects. Everyone was desperate. Not a single clue pointed to a potential murderer. Searching for a lead, the police reported extensively on the case in the press for a month. During that time, an artist named Lois Gibson was visiting her family in Newton. She had helped the Houston police find more than 1,000 criminals. Lois saw a newspaper article mentioning that a certain Ronda Creel had been murdered in Newton. The picture showed a young, beautiful woman. She was surprised, because murders were rare in a town like that. Lois decided to finish reading the article to see how the investigation turned out. But at the end, she realized the murderer had never been found. She felt torn. Lois told herself it might not be a good idea to call the investigators because she was on vacation. However, the article mentioned a 5-year-old girl, Natalie, whom the murderer had locked in a closet. Lois realized she could help the investigation. She called the police station that same day. A few days later, Lois was invited to meet with 5-year-old Natalie Creel. Working with children is easier. They are quick, even if they do not know all the words, and their memory for faces is better and more precise. Children are determined and do not hesitate. Lois talks to the victims, asking them to do something very unpleasant, to describe the person who symbolizes the worst experience in their lives. She gave Natalie a copy of the FBI facial identification catalog and used the same catalog on her easel. The victim looked at pictures of different eyes, mouths, and noses. There are almost 200 in the catalog, and Lois drew the features she pointed out. Natalie chose the images, and Lois sketched the killer's face, starting from the top of the head and ending at the chin. It turned out Natalie remembered him well. He was white, with dark hair down to his ears. When the girl chose the eyes, Lois told her there was no need to name the eye color, but Natalie immediately replied that his eyes were blue. An hour later, the portrait was finished. The girl still remembered how frightened she felt when she looked at it, because this man had just killed her mother. The drawing was sent directly to the police, and it was done with almost photographic accuracy. There was hope at last that the crime might be solved. Based on the drawing, one could now recognize the man who had terrified Newton by sight. He did not look like the husband of one of the victim's sisters, Kevin, so Walton was convinced Kevin was innocent and that the real murderer was still at large. The investigators contacted the newspapers. They printed ads and distributed them throughout the city and state to all police stations. Over the course of a month, the investigators received more and more tips. Walton checked each one, but it was all in vain. A year passed and the case of Ronda Creel remained unsolved. Everyone was sad and frightened because the killer had not been found and arrested. Everyone suffered, her family and all of Newton. The investigators had to solve the crime, but despite their efforts, Ronda Creel's murderer was still on the loose. On September 23, 1995, something changed. Walton got a call from the police in the neighboring town of Wichita. A young woman named Janet McCann had gone missing. Walton had no idea that the lead he had been searching for all along was 50 kilometers from Newton. For more than a year, Newton police officers had been trying to track down the criminal who had murdered the housewife Ronda Creel in cold blood. Detectives in the neighboring town of Wichita asked them for help in investigating Janet McCann's disappearance. She was in her early 30s and worked as an escort on South Broadway Street. A man approached her and offered her money to spend the night with him. Janet agreed, but her friend Emma tried to talk her out of it. However, she insisted everything was fine and left. Emma did not like this man at all. She felt something was off and wrote down his car's license plate, in case her friend did not return. The next day, Emma's fears were confirmed. Janet was nowhere to be found. Emma called the police and reported that she had not seen the man's face, but had taken down the car's number. The car was registered to a certain Chester Higginbotham who lived in Newton, Kansas. Investigator Walton immediately obtained a search warrant. Since no one was home, he offered to break down the door. At that moment, Chester Higginbotham and his wife Jenna pulled up. She was surprised to see so many officers outside their house and did not understand what they wanted. Chester said he would handle everything and asked his wife to stay in the car. Then he walked over to the officers, spoke with them, and agreed to come in for questioning. Investigator Walton stayed behind to assist in the search. The forensics team looked for any sign of Janet McCann in the house, whether she had left her handbag or other items behind. The search warrant also covered Higginbotham's car, but the police found nothing. Walton then headed to the station where the suspect was being interrogated. At first, Chester denied ever having met the missing woman. When pressed, he admitted he had been with Janet McCann but claimed he had only taken her to the bus station where he supposedly last saw her. The investigators did not believe him. A friend of the victim stated that Janet had nowhere to go outside of town. Moreover, the police checked Higginbotham's story and discovered that the station had been closed long before he claimed to have taken her there. The investigators conducted a background check and discovered more. Chester Higginbotham had been convicted multiple times for burglary and robbery. Over the last 10 years, he had frequently ended up in jail for petty crimes. In the early 90s, he moved to Newton. To learn more about him, Walton invited his wife Jenna to the station. She said she worked as a cashier at a gas station on the north side of town. A man came in often, bringing his cup, asking for a drink, sometimes cigarettes. His smile made Jenna's heart skip a beat. She was very excited when he asked her out. After a while, Higginbotham confessed his love for Jenna. They dated for 6 months. He worked as a waiter and mechanic, saved up for a ring, and proposed to her. At first, he was a good husband, but sometimes he drank. Once, when he was drunk, he flew into a rage and broke through the bedroom wall. Jenna was scared to death at the time but said nothing. Chester wanted control, and Jenna never caused him problems. She stayed out of his way, did not argue, and respected his authority. Investigator Walton then explained why her husband had been invited to the station. He told Jenna outright that Chester was suspected of kidnapping the escort Janet McCann from Wichita and taking her to Newton. He was the last person seen with her, and no one had seen her since. Jenna did not want to believe it, because it was her husband they were talking about. But after a brief silence, she revealed something strange that had happened a few days earlier. Chester went out with friends that evening. Around 11:30 or 11 p.m., Jenna thought it was time for him to come home. An hour passed, and he was still missing. She began to worry that something had happened to him. Jenna got in her car and drove to the warehouse where her husband kept parts and worked. He was indeed there, saying he was loading parts for an oil change the next morning. Jenna noticed he was not alone. She asked who the woman in his car was. Chester replied that she was an acquaintance of an acquaintance, and he had been asked to give her a ride. While Jenna was talking to him, the strange woman did not move. It looked like she was not sitting but half lying there. Jenna was shocked. At home, she started praying that the woman was still alive and well. 15 or 20 minutes later, Chester came home and they went to bed, but Jenna had a bad feeling. Something told her something irreversible had happened. However, she was too scared to go to the police. Investigator Walton suspected that the woman in Chester's car had to be Janet McCann, and she was probably dead by that time. He also assumed that her body was still at the warehouse. After obtaining a search warrant and thoroughly combing the place, the investigators found no trace of Janet. However, the police discovered suspicious items: nylon ropes, tape, and cable ties. They did not know if these items would help the investigation, since no traces were found, but they were kept as evidence. The officers arrested Higginbotham for having involvement with the escort, convinced he had killed Janet McCann. They did not want him to flee or hide her body. While he was locked up, the investigators had time and began searching. For weeks, the police scoured abandoned buildings, fields, and lakes. In October, a worker discovered something suspicious by the roadside: a badly decomposed body. The woman was lying face down, with her legs bent at the knees and her wrists tied. That is how cattle are restrained. Her face was sealed with tape, covering her nose and mouth. Piece by piece, the puzzle began to come together for Investigator Walton. He saw the whole picture. Janet McCann lay before him, and he knew who had killed Ronda Creel. 1 month after 36-year-old Janet McCann drove away with Chester Higginbotham, her decomposed remains were discovered in a ditch 50 kilometers from Wichita. She died a gruesome death, and the method of murder was familiar to the investigators. When Investigator Walton saw Janet McCann's body, it reminded him immediately of Ronda Creel. They said if you compared photos of Ronda's crime scene with those of Janet, there would be practically no difference. It was very unusual for 2 women to be killed and tied up in the same way in such a small jurisdiction. Suddenly, the investigators realized that Chester Higginbotham, the suspect in Janet's murder, bore a striking resemblance to the description they had gotten from Ronda's killer. Chester had cut his hair short after the first murder, but his face and mustache were exactly as they appeared in Lois Gibson's sketch. A highly disturbing realization set in. They had spent far too long looking for Ronda's murderer, allowing Chester to claim a second victim, Janet McCann. However, the police still did not have enough evidence to convict him of that crime. It was impossible to obtain the perpetrator's DNA. The victim's body was decomposed, and it was impossible to prove the perpetrator had had intercourse with the murdered woman. The police had no right to keep Higginbotham behind bars without proof of his guilt in the murders of Janet and Ronda, but if they released him, he would certainly kill again. Investigator Walton was at a loss, knowing he had Ronda's murderer in his hands but lacking the final piece of the puzzle to implicate him. He took another look at Ronda's file and reviewed the evidence. The striking resemblance to the sketch was noteworthy, but it was not enough to justify an arrest. The cigarette butts found on the street contained no traces, and in 1995, it was impossible to extract DNA from them. The aviator glasses showed no fingerprints either. Then Walton decided to try something and called Higginbotham's wife. First, he told her that Chester was suspected of another murder. Then Walton asked her what brand of cigarettes her husband smoked. Jenna immediately named the exact brand of cigarette butts found outside Ronda Creel's home. The investigator then asked if her husband wore sunglasses. Jenna said he wore the same kind of aviator sunglasses that had been found under the bed in Ronda's house. Walton realized that this man could not slip through the cracks. A few days later, Investigator Walton heard that FBI agents would be holding a master class on preserving evidence. He attended the lecture and learned that the technology had improved in the meantime. DNA could now even be isolated from eyeglass lenses. Walton immediately thought of the glasses found in Ronda's home. He contacted the medical examiner and asked if they could extract DNA by smoking out the glasses. The medical examiner replied that maybe they could try. Walton sent the glasses along with a sample of Higginbotham's blood to the state crime lab. In the lab, experts had great difficulty removing the chemicals from the lenses, which took several hours. Then swabs were taken from the lenses, and they waited for months for the results. While investigator Walton waited, he and his colleagues tried to put together a detailed psychological profile of the serial killer who had been targeting women in his town. During the investigation, they learned that his mother was an older woman who had conceived him by a lover. At the age of 6 or 7, meaning very early on, Chester Higginbotham began stealing from stores and soon ended up on the police radar. He was taken from his home and moved among foster families. In one of them, he was abused by the foster parents, who locked the boy in a dark closet as punishment, just as he had locked Ronda's daughter Natalie and her friend in a closet. But if he killed Ronda, why did he leave witnesses? The investigators believe that, in a certain way, he felt connected to them, that he felt sorry for them and spared their lives. Meanwhile, Walton looked into what Higginbotham had done in May 1994, when Ronda was killed. Chester had not yet met Jenna. He was living in a halfway house 2 blocks from Ronda's house, and passed by her home every day on his way to work at a restaurant. Investigators questioned employees at the restaurant. One of them said that Ronda and her church friends had dinner there a week before the tragedy. The manager who normally served that area was away that day, so Ronda had a question about the bill and called the waiter over. It was Chester Hibbott. They had a heated argument in the restaurant, and he became angry, insulting Ronda and saying he did not care what she thought. The police suspected that this incident drove him to murder because he hated women and wanted to control them completely. Walton's version was confirmed. The Wichita police informed him of the forensic findings from the scene of Janet McCann's murder and the warehouse. Experts discovered that the gray tape found in the warehouse matched the tape used by the killer to tape Janet's mouth shut, and that the torn edge of the tape matched perfectly. They also found that the nylon rope used to bind Janet's hands and feet came from the same source that was found there. Chester Higginbotham was charged with murdering Janet McCann. On one hand, Many were relieved that Chester would spend the rest of his life behind bars, and such a crime would not happen again. On the other hand, the case of Ronda Creel remained unsolved. Then more good news arrived. The state crime lab had found DNA on the glasses from Ronda's house. Chester Higginbotham's DNA was on them. Investigator Walton was overjoyed. Finally, there was proof that Chester had been in that bedroom, near the bed where Ronda was murdered. On May 20th, 1996, almost 2 years after the tragedy, the police were able at last to piece together exactly how Ronda Creel was killed. When she opened the door, she immediately realized she was in danger. Her first thought was how to protect the girls. Ronda was willing to do anything Chester told her, as long as she could save them. Chester entered the house. Initially, he only wanted to rape her, but he had no time because he was interrupted. His thirst for power and anger surfaced, and he grabbed a hammer and beat Ronda to death. Chester Higginbotham is the true embodiment of evil. Neither words nor any other means could make him feel empathy for his victims or their families. People like Higginbotham are the reason prisons exist. On August 1st, 1996, Chester Higginbotham was found guilty of murdering Janet McCann and was sentenced to 40 years in prison. On December 2nd of the same year, he was sentenced to another 40 years in prison for the murder of Ronda Creel. He is serving both sentences at Lansing Correctional Facility in Kansas and has no chance of parole. Thank you for watching, and take care. The devout Inman family seemed perfect on the outside. They went to church together every Sunday, but no one around them could have imagined what went on behind closed doors in that respectable household. William and Sandra Inman met in church in 1983. He was 18, she was only 16, two young people who, with their parents' permission, decided to marry. They settled in the small town of Logan in Hocking County, Ohio. Bill Inman considered himself a devout man. He worked in construction and played musical instruments at the Tabernacle of Faith Evangelical Church, near Nelsonville, Ohio. Sandra was a homemaker. 1 year later, in 1984, the Inmans had a son named William Jr. Because father and son had the same name, to avoid confusion they called the father Bill and the son Will. Years went by, and William Jr. grew up. In 2001, at the age of 17, the boy met a girl named Summer Cook in church. She was only 15. Their story of meeting was very similar to Bill and Sandra's. Will and Summer were friends for 3 years, and when the girl turned 18, they married in 2004. Immediately after the wedding, the newlyweds began living with Will's parents in a large, spacious house in Logan, Ohio. That same year, 2004, the 39-year-old Bill Inman believed he was a religious leader. He converted his garage into an improvised church and began holding services there. Initially, locals were not entirely on board with everything the self-appointed pastor did, but his mysterious garage on the property first attracted neighbors, then acquaintances, and eventually more and more people. They prayed, soothed their souls, and left donations. In 2005, Will and Summer had their first son, Alex. Around this time, the Inman family began experiencing financial difficulties. Bill's work in the church did not bring in much money, and the family decided to move to another state in search of better opportunities. In 2006, all the Inmans moved to Florida, where Bill and Will quickly found work. The men worked in hotel construction, while Sandra and Summer took care of the house and raised Alex. 2 years later, the family returned from Florida to their home state of Ohio. By then, they had lost their house in Logan through foreclosure. They rented another house in rural Wyndon. Almost immediately after moving, in 2008, Will and Summer had a daughter named Kelly. 2 years later, a third child arrived, daughter Alana. Almost every weekend, the young parents, Will and Summer, tried to get out of the house for an entire day to relax and recharge. Bill and Sandra always supported their son and daughter-in-law. and on weekends, the grandparents looked after their 3 grandchildren, who were the center of their lives. In the spring of 2010, Bill Inman obtained his pastoral license, declared himself head of the Tabernacle of Faith Church, and, together with his wife, registered a non-profit organization called Mercy Ranch. He decided he wanted to help people who had lost their jobs and homes. He wanted to build a large house with his own hands to shelter orphaned children and widows, but there was a problem. The Inman family had no money for construction. Then Bill had the idea to hold a lottery. People would each buy a ticket to raise money for the build, and at the end there would be a draw in which one lucky person would win a house or 200. In addition, Bill Inman promised to award 99 more big prizes. Locals learned about this raffle from news and ads. Initially, Bill went door to door himself, asking people to participate and buy a ticket, promising a wonderful prize and saying that the remaining proceeds would go toward building a homeless shelter. The price per ticket was $10, and Bill sold a total of 100 tickets, collecting $1 million for the project. The drawing was supposed to take place in September 2010. Meanwhile, in the Inman family's private life, not everything was going as well as in their business dealing. In June 2010, Summer told her husband Will that she wanted to divorce him after 6 years of marriage. Shortly before that, Summer had written the following entry in her personal diary. "I'm so tired of trying to make everyone else happy. I'm exhausted. Don't I deserve to be happy? Don't I deserve to love someone again and feel love? I don't know if this is the right time, but I want to tell Will everything. I feel really bad. I think he deserves to know the truth. He needs to know that I don't want to be with him anymore, that I want to be alone to know myself and figure out who I am. Right now, I'm just a slave running around obeying all their orders. I love my children with all my heart. I wouldn't trade them for anything. I don't want them to grow up and see their mother just following orders. I don't know how Will react to all this. Maybe he'll get angry and try to take the kids away or threaten me or worse. I think the kids should see both of us equally often. I know Will's parents will turn against me and try to force me to stay, but I know that won't change anything. Last night, Will asked me what I want, and I don't know. I only know what I don't want. I don't want to be unhappy and feel trapped, but I couldn't tell him that, so I just sat there silently. Every day, I just want to cry and sleep and nothing happens. I don't know how to get out of this situation, so everything will be okay again. I hope that by my next entry I'll figure out how to set things right." She filed for divorce and moved out of the Inman house, taking her son, her 2 daughters, and her personal belongings. They moved into Summer's parents' house. She did not want to deprive her children of their father, so she allowed them to see their father and grandparents. 2 months after separating from her husband, in August 2010, Summer Inman began a relationship with a man named Adam Peters. Around the same time, Summer took a job at a bank in downtown Logan. Since she had no formal training, she worked as a custodian. In September, the house that was supposed to be given away by Mercy Ranch, the nonprofit owned by the Inman family, was to be raffled off. By that point, however, construction on the prize house had not even begun. The months of September and October went by without any progress, and the raffle never took place. No one gave a reason, and Mercy Ranch was in no hurry to refund participants' money. On December 1, 2010, the Inman family was informed that they had to vacate their rented house because they owed a large amount in back rent. When Summer found out, she traveled with Adam to the Inman house to retrieve personal belongings she had left behind. However, she and her new boyfriend Adam were not allowed inside. Summer called the police, reporting that her estranged husband was threatening her and preventing her from getting her things. When the police arrived, Will and his parents still wouldn't let anyone into the house. Will threatened to shoot Adam, and then got into an argument with a police officer. Summer wrote a statement against her husband, saying that before they got married, their relationship had been perfect. But after the official wedding, Will changed drastically. He began constantly controlling her and making demands, telling her what to do and when to do it. This applied to meals, housework, and their intimate life. Summer wasn't allowed to go to bed without her husband's permission. He kept her locked up at home and wouldn't let her go out, hiding her cell phone and key. Summer confessed that Will wanted her to bear him 12 children. He dreamed of having a second wife and frequently visited websites for polygamous families, where he posted explicit photos of himself. Summer said that Will threatened to kill her if she filed for divorce, and he had also taken her cats away and driven them somewhere unknown, claiming they jumped out of an open window and disappeared, and that she would never see them again. After Summer's accusations, Will apologized and claimed he had only taken her phones and keys because he suspected she had a lover. He said the cats were feral, damaging furniture and scratching everyone, so he simply took them to an animal shelter. Will Inman received a restraining order and was forbidden from approaching Summer. In addition, he was fined and given probation. At the same time, a fierce custody battle began between the two families. The Inman family went to the police to report that Adam Peters was a dangerous man who could harm Alex, Kelly, and Alana. And in fact, something terrible did happen in Summer's life. Late on the evening of March 22, 2011, 25-year-old Summer Inman finished her shift at the bank. After locking up the branch, she cleaned up the employees' workstations and stepped outside to throw away the trash. It was already 11 p.m. Summer sent a text message to her boyfriend, with whom she had plans after work, but Adam was not waiting for her. At around 11:30 p.m., Adam went to the bank where Summer worked. He walked around the building and found her belongings in the alley next to the dumpster. On the ground were Summer's phone, her keys, and a working music player with headphones. A bit farther off in the grass lay her jacket. Adam called Summer's parents to inform them of his discovery and that she was missing, asking them to contact the police right away. Her parents first called the bank to ask about Summer, suspecting she might have arrived late to clean and lost her phone and personal items. But bank security had no idea where she was. The parents then called the Logan Police Department to report their daughter missing. They explained that Summer was on a strict schedule and rarely ran late for work. Officers arrived at the scene where Summer's personal belongings had been found. 3 witnesses were already there, saying they had seen Summer abducted from that spot an hour earlier. 2 women who had been out jogging that evening testified that they saw Summer taking out the trash when a white Ford Crown Victoria approached, driven by a blonde woman. 2 men in black ski masks got out of the car, grabbed Summer, and forced her into the back seat. She resisted, screamed, and cried for help. A bystander tried to intervene, but the Drivera blonde woman sprayed him in the face with pepper spray, and he backed off. The car then sped away. The 2 female joggers ran to the nearest police station to report the incident, but for some reason, the police found the women's story odd and thought they had made it up. Officers did not arrive at the scene until an hour later, after Summer's parents had contacted them. Sadly, it was not possible to find the missing woman in a pursuit. News of the 25-year-old Summer Inman's abduction quickly spread through every local news outlet, and hundreds of concerned residents of Logan came together to help in the search. 3 days went by, and hope of finding her safe and sound grew fainter. Her parents tried not to think about the worst possible outcome. Just a few weeks before her disappearance, Summer Inman had posted a photo on her Facebook page with her new boyfriend, Adam, along with her son and daughters. In the photo, they seemed like a truly happy family. Will Inman thought so too when he saw the new post on Adam Peters' Facebook page, with whom he happened to be Facebook friends. The question arose, why would a husband add his ex-wife's boyfriend as a friend? It turned out that Summer met Adam before she ever decided to leave Will. A year earlier, in the spring of 2010, Adam Peters, who had no steady job and scraped by on occasional work, took a job with the Inman family doing house and yard maintenance. That's where he met Summer and fell in love with her. He began paying attention to her. At first, she rejected him, but she eventually gave in. In Summer's diary there is an entry. When I looked into his eyes, I realized the devil had taken hold of me. I didn't listen to what God was telling me. I tried to stop, but my mind was screaming, "Run away, leave now." Instead, I stayed and let him hug me, and then I sank even deeper. "I'm really sorry. It was my fault." Her encounter with Adam was the beginning of the end of Summer's life at the Inman's house. She realized she wanted to be happy and feel loved, so she filed for divorce, which was taking a long time. 50. At the time, his total annual income was just $6,500 a month. Will Inman and his parents tried to gain full custody of the children, but the judge refused. Bill and Sandra had lost weight and looked gaunt since losing regular contact with their grandchildren. Everyone who knew them agreed that their grandchildren were the purpose of their lives. In March, after Summer disappeared, the police tracked down the Inman family. All three, Bill, Sandra, and Will, were at Bill's 70-year-old mother's house in Jackson County, Ohio. They all claimed they knew nothing about Summer's abduction. According to the Inmans, they had driven to Cleveland the night Summer was abducted to look at a new house. After a 3-hour drive, their car broke down, and they spent the whole night outside trying to fix it, returning to Logan only in the morning. They claimed they got along well with Summer and rarely argued, but that once Adam Peters moved in with them, life darkened. All three insisted that Adam was a bad person who had destroyed their once happy, loyal, and pious family. Officers noticed a white Ford Crown Victoria parked in the yard of the Inman home. The car was examined, and police secured a GPS receiver. It turned out that on the afternoon of March 22, the day Summer was abducted, the car had indeed been in Logan, and the GPS system was switched off around 5:30 p.m. It wasn't turned back on again until the next morning, March 23, in Logan. There was no verification that the Inmans had driven to Cleveland. A phone records check also showed that all three were in Logan on March 22 and 23. Soon it came to light that on the morning of March 23 at 7:30 a.m., the Inman family, Bill, Sandra, and Will, had gone to a car wash to have the interior thoroughly cleaned. Summer was not with them. After the car wash, they went to an auto shop in Cleveland to have the tires changed. Workers at the shop said they found it odd that Bill wanted to replace nearly new tires with used ones. He said he simply didn't like the tires he had. It also emerged that the Inmans tried to alter the look of their car by having Bill remove the police-style spotlight located on the driver's door near the side mirror. Bill, Sandra, and Will Inman were arrested and interrogated. Before his arrest, Bill told his mother that they had done nothing wrong and that the whole ordeal was the devil's doing. During questioning, all three continued to insist on their innocence and denied knowing who had kidnapped Summer Inman or why. After several hours, Sandra Inman, who realized they could face the death penalty if found guilty, broke down and confessed everything. She admitted that they were the ones who abducted Summer on the night of March 22. The men in black masks were her husband, Bill, and her son, Will. Sandra said she was the one who came up with the idea to abduct Summer and scare her, but things did not go according to plan. When Summer was shoved into the back seat of the car, Will put plastic zip ties around her neck, arms, and legs. He wanted to scare his wife so that she would come to her senses and let him, his son, and his daughters see each other. He tried to cut through the ties with a knife and free her, calling to his mother, "Oh my God, Mom, where's the knife? I can't find it." All three were terrified, searching for the knife, but after a few moments, Summer stopped breathing and died. Sandra insisted they did not intend to kill their daughter-in-law. They just wanted to resolve their custody problems in this way so they could see their grandchildren on weekends. On March 29, 2011, 7 days after the abduction, Sandra showed the police where they had hidden the body. They had placed Summer in a septic tank on the grounds of the Tabernacle of Faith Church near Nelsonville, 30 kilometers from the bank where Summer worked. Bill Inman had helped build that church, and it was the same church where Bill and Sandra were married 28 years earlier. The Inman family had gone there every Sunday for many years, and Bill had played instruments there. When police removed the concrete slab, unscrewed 6 bolts from the metal lid, and lifted it open. They immediately saw Summer's feet. She had been thrown headfirst into the pit, wearing the same clothes as on her last work day, a black t-shirt with the words, "I don't have an anger problem. I have a problem with idiots." An autopsy showed that Summer had indeed been strangled. There were no other injuries on her body apart from marks on her neck, arms, and legs indicating she had been tied up. Sandra said that at first, she had wanted Bill to dump the body in a river, but then thought it would be safer to hide it in the well by the church, because no one would find it there. She admitted she was deeply ashamed of her actions. The trial took place soon afterward. Bill Inman, 49, and Will Inman, 28, both pleaded not guilty to Summer's death. They said very little during the hearing, showed no emotion, and avoided looking at the victim's parents. Sandra Inman, 47, was the only one who pleaded guilty and tried to take full responsibility. She continued to claim it was her idea to frighten her daughter-in-law. Before sentencing, Sandra tearfully addressed Summer's parents and asked for their forgiveness. Her words were difficult to make out because of her sobbing and emotion, but one thing was clear: she was remorseful. Sandra said that Summer was like her own daughter, and that if she could turn back time, she would never repeat her terrible plan. In 2012, all 3 were found guilty. Bill and Will Inman each received a life sentence with no possibility of parole. Sandra Inman received a life sentence but can be considered for parole after 15 years. All close friends and fellow church members knew that the Inman family was run as a patriarchy. None of them believed Sandra had been the one to initiate this crime, knowing that Bill was the head of the household and always had the final word, and that Will had been spoiled since childhood, with his parents fulfilling his every whim. Those who knew them believed Sandra was trying to take the blame and lessen the punishment for her husband and son as much as possible. Alex, Kelly, and Alana are still being raised by the parents of the deceased Summer. It took them a long time to explain to their grandchildren where their mother, father, grandmother, and grandfather had gone. Thank you for watching and take care of yourselves. Criminals are prepared to do anything to receive a lenient sentence or, ideally, to escape responsibility altogether. Yet sometimes their methods seem shocking and abhorrent, even by criminal standards. Today, we want to tell you how the police caught a true master of reincarnation and improvisation. Veronica Panarello was a young woman living in Italy who was confronted with many trials. One day, at the age of 16, she met a man named David Stivel in a bar. From the very first moment, she was incredibly taken with him. He was 4 years older than she was, but the young people got to know each other, quickly discovered many common interests, and started dating despite the fact that the girl was still very young. Only 3 months later, she asked him if they could start a family. Veronica was certain that she wanted a child with him. The young man agreed, and they moved in together. Soon, she learned she was pregnant. In 2006, her son Loris was born. At that time, Veronica was only 17 years old, and her boyfriend was 21. In that period, there was a difficult situation in her family. Veronica was constantly in conflict with her parents, so she often ran away from home, and the birth of an illegitimate child became yet another reason for her parents to criticize her. Nevertheless, despite her young age, Veronica managed to maintain the appearance of a family. Contrary to the expectations of the older generation, everything initially went well. Unfortunately, fate had a cruel blow in store for them, but until that point, the young woman tried her utmost to give the child everything he needed. Later, the couple officially registered their marriage. The young wife and mother became pregnant for a second time and gave birth to a boy, whom she named Diego. Veronica was still partly under her parents' care. Her husband worked, but his efforts were not enough to support a family with 2 children. Both families of the young couple supported them in every possible way, especially financially. Veronica, on the other hand, had no intention of getting a job. She devoted herself entirely to caring for the children in the household. Her husband considered her a good wife. She was thrifty, neat, and a loving mother. The children grew up, and her relationship with her sons was affectionate. Veronica spent all her free time with them, but at times it seemed more like a friendship between peers, probably due to her young age when she became a mother. Many people said that she was still very rebellious during this time, leading to ever more frequent conflicts with her parents. The older generation believed she could not be a proper mother if she treated what was happening like a game. Every attempt to get through to Veronica ended with her becoming hysterical. The young family lived in a rural area where everyone knew everyone else. The settlement was called Santa Croce Camerina, in southern Sicily, with only 10 inhabitants. Despite the cozy small-town atmosphere, such early motherhood was unusual there. No one suspected that this rushed youthful impulse would lead to something so horrific as the brutal tragedy we are talking about today. On November 29, 2014, around 1:00 p.m., Veronica Panarello showed up at the police station. The young woman reported that her 8-year-old son Loris had disappeared. She confessed that she had taken him to school that morning, as she always did, dropped him off just before reaching the school, and watched him walk there with the other children. She then dropped off her younger child at kindergarten. Loris was supposed to be in school until 12:30 p.m. The young mother returned to pick up her son, but he never appeared. She became worried when she could not find him, and went straight to the police to report his disappearance. The police immediately contacted the school, but none of the teachers or staff had seen the missing boy that day. The students also confirmed that they had not seen him outside the school or in class. They suspected he might have skipped school. Some thought he could have been abducted, but no one believed that the boy would have willingly climbed into a stranger's car. He was too intelligent for that. Then the question arose, how could Loris have ended up on the street if his mother had taken him to school and seen him enter? At that time, his father David, who worked as a driver, was on a flight to Rome. The man, who was 29 years old at the time, was surprised to hear from the police, as Veronica had not informed him of what had happened. He immediately called his wife, and she confirmed that Loris was missing. He then caught a flight back to the city as quickly as possible. Upon arriving, he saw a post on social media with a photo of his wife and child. The post announced that the boy had been found dead. Loris's body was discovered only 4 hours after the police were notified. The boy had been disposed of in a ravine near an old mill, just minutes from the family's home. His body was found by chance by an older man who was out on one of his usual walks in the woods while hunting. He noticed something strange on the ground. When he got closer, he realized it was not a random discarded object, but the body of a child. He immediately called the police to report his discovery. At the site, forensic examiners found the boy's mutilated body unnaturally twisted in the ditch. His pants were slightly pulled down, and he was not wearing underwear. The police officers immediately suspected a sexual motive for the crime. Investigators believed they were dealing with a pedophile who not only abused his victims but also killed them, making the perpetrator doubly dangerous. When the townspeople heard about the tragedy, the city fell into panic. No one could go on living as they had before, because every child could be targeted by a predator on the prowl. News of the murder in the small town spread quickly throughout the country. The story of the victim was featured on major Italian television channels, and it became one of the most significant news stories of 2014, shaking the public. People demanded that the police find the perpetrator and bring him to justice. Meanwhile, investigators tirelessly searched for the monster capable of such brutality. To calm the public, the investigators took note of several oddities about the case. The crime clearly did not follow the usual pattern of rapists or madmen. The greatest oddity was not even the fact that the child was not wearing underwear. After undressing the victim, the perpetrator put the boy's pants back on. Criminals often collect their victims' belongings but almost never dress them again after taking a trophy. Moreover, there had never been any similar cases in the area. The police then turned their attention to the victim's family. Veronica and David were considered decent people. Everyone knew them as a loving young family. Although the child was born when the mother was a minor, she was now an adult. Veronica gave the impression of a loving parent. In any case, it is usually the family that can provide the most valuable information in these situations. The investigators spoke to the parents of the murdered boy and found that the father was rarely home because he worked as a driver, spending no more than 15 days with his family in a whole month. The children spent nearly all their free time with their mother, so the young woman was constantly alone without her husband. It was hard for her to manage the household and raise the children on her own. She had complained about these difficulties. Against this backdrop, rumors circulated in town that she had a lover, but upon investigation, these rumors could not be confirmed. The police found Veronica in the family's apartment. According to David, she was devastated by the tragedy, constantly crying and refusing to eat, leading her to become emaciated. Veronica was taken to the hospital, where she received special nutrient infusions so that she would not die. Police officers who saw her at that time noted that she indeed did not look well. Veronica was emotionally broken, which was reflected in her physical appearance. She had large, dark circles under her eyes and an unhealthy pallor. During this period, Loris's younger brother Diego was still living with the family, but his parents soon took him to his grandparents as his mother was in an unstable mental state. She neglected not only herself but also the needs of her child. Her husband, who had supported her all along, had to give up his job. Despite how severely the Stivel family was affected by the loss of their child, the investigators decided to take both parents to the site where Loris's body had been found. They filmed it, hoping this might yield valuable information. In the video, Veronica seems almost like the shadow of a person she was clearly suffering intensely from the loss of her son. Another name on the list of suspects was Orazio Fedone, the older hunter who had discovered the boy's body. The investigators found it suspicious that he had stumbled upon the victim only 4 hours after the missing person report was filed. Naturally, it could have been a coincidence, but they needed to find out how he could have found the body so quickly. They conducted a thorough background check on him but found no link between the hunter and the crime. He passed a lie detector test, had a confirmed alibi for the morning of Loris's disappearance, and his fingerprints and DNA were not on the boy's body. Nevertheless, growing interest in Orazio Fedone led locals to accuse Veronica of having an intimate relationship with his grandson and even with the hunter himself. After meticulous inquiries, Fedone was ultimately cleared of all suspicion, and it turned out that he had indeed discovered the boy by pure chance. It was just unfortunate that he came across the scene only a few hours after the missing person report was filed. The investigators had exhausted all speculation and leads and found no evidence pointing to the perpetrator, so they decided to bring in reinforcements from Rome. The newly involved investigators suspected, after studying the case files, that the mother was involved in her son's disappearance. They immediately pointed to problems in the family relationship. The grandparents told the investigators that the boy had mentioned a strange experiment at school the day before his disappearance. According to the child, his mother had bought plastic cable ties that were supposedly needed for class. The boy mentioned this the day before he disappeared, which seemed suspicious since cable ties are very dangerous and would never be used in school. When the investigators questioned the teachers about the experiment, they learned that there were no such plans and no cable ties would have been needed. Ultimately, the investigators concluded that the boy must have made it up. However, when the forensic medical examiner's report came out, the investigators recalled these items. According to the expert who performed the autopsy, the boy's time of death was between 9:00 a.m. and 10:00 a.m. on the day he went missing. The cause of death was strangulation by a thin foreign object wrapped around his neck. It was highly likely that he was strangled with cable ties. At that time, the investigators assumed there could be a link between the two events. The pathologist believed the child was killed near the spot where his body was found, because the injuries from the fall occurred almost immediately after death, or he had been thrown in alive and died shortly thereafter. The investigators speculated that the child had asked for these cable ties for some reason, making up a story about needing them for school. Then Loris must have had them in his backpack when he went to class. But how did the killer, who ambushed him, know that? It seemed unlikely that the murderer attacked the boy, grabbed his backpack, and found the murder weapon inside. The carabinieri decided that the backpack might provide new clues. They closed off all the landfills where trash from Santa Croce Camerona was taken. The police spent several days searching through the refuse, but never found the boy's blue backpack. The autopsy also revealed something else peculiar. Although the child was not wearing underwear and his pants were pulled down, there was no sign of sexual abuse, nor did they find any DNA evidence of a supposed perpetrator. At that point, the police began to doubt their earlier assumption. They continued looking for the killer, but realized this likely was not a typical madman or pedophile. It no longer looked like a sexually motivated crime. A complete psychological profile of the murderer was needed, but at this stage of the investigation, the information was too scattered to make sense of. The solution was obvious. The investigators decided to retrace mother and child's movements on the day of the murder. Although it was a small provincial town, Veronica and Loris traveled on the main road where many houses and businesses had surveillance cameras. Collecting and reviewing these recordings took a lot of time. The law enforcement officers hoped to find a third party following the woman and her son in their black Volkswagen Polo, perhaps a suspicious vehicle. But however hard they tried, they could not find anything unusual or relevant. Nevertheless, something quickly stood out to the investigators. They never once found footage of Loris entering the school, despite the mother repeatedly claiming she had accompanied her son right up to the school's doorstep that morning. It was clear that Veronica had lied and never arrived at the school that morning with her older son. Dozens of hours of footage were examined, but only the younger child was seen getting out of the car near the kindergarten. The investigators kept analyzing footage in the surrounding area and noticed that Veronica took a turn at an intersection toward a church near where the boy's body was later found. This was strange, because for years she had always taken a different route. Why would a young mother change her routine on the very day her son was found dead? The carabinieri decided not to reveal what they knew so as not to scare Veronica off, but they began to consider her a suspect. Experienced police officers set out to check whether her statements were true. They asked Veronica to drive the same route she had taken on the day of her son's death and show them everything in person. The investigators already knew the route from the video recordings. The woman agreed, and they began reconstructing the events. Approaching the critical intersection where she had changed her usual route, the woman claimed she had simply driven her usual way. By now, it was clear she was hiding something, and her lies made her the main suspect. The investigators searched the Stivel home and took Veronica to the station for questioning. When she realized that the police considered her a likely murderer, she became indignant and insisted she would never have hurt her son. However, the investigators believed the opposite. The interrogation lasted several hours, but Veronica continued to insist she was innocent. During questioning, she admitted that she had dropped her older son off 500 meters from the school that morning because she was in a rush, so he had to walk the rest of the way alone. Thus, in her opinion, someone could have attacked him on his way. When asked what she was doing at the ravine at the time her son was killed, she denied even knowing the place, though this was obviously false. Veronica's sister confirmed that they had spent time there as children and knew every inch of the area. Moreover, the surveillance videos showed her presence there. The investigators had to review many hours of footage again to confirm their suspicion and collect more evidence. The murdered boy's father was also involved in the investigation. Initially, he did not believe his wife could have been involved in their son's murder. However, David identified Veronica and the two children on the surveillance footage leaving the house that morning. Instead of taking the older boy to school, she brought him back home. A figure resembling Loris appeared on the camera but was never seen again. Veronica then dropped off the younger child at kindergarten and returned home. Unlike usual, she did not park the car in front of the house but backed it into the garage. This happened at around 9:00 a.m. The investigators believe the boy was killed during this time frame. He was not at school but rather at home, and when she drove into the garage, she disappeared from camera range, possibly doing something secretive. It all seemed too suspicious, like she was hiding something. When confronted about this, the main suspect continued to deny it. She said she had taken the older child to school, the younger one to kindergarten, then come home and gone about her day. She stuck to her story that the boy could have been abducted near the school. The police did not believe her and reviewed the cameras again. At 9:23 a.m., Veronica left the house, and 2 minutes later she drove toward the old mill where her son's body was later found. At 9:38 a.m., she returned home, certainly alone by that time. Given how quickly it all happened, the child must already have been dead when she threw him into the ravine. By 9:41 a.m., Veronica was heading to a cooking class she attended regularly, which started at 10:00 a.m., so she left early enough not to be late or draw suspicion. Nobody present at the class noticed anything unusual about her behavior. She seemed exactly as she always did. GPS data from her phone and car confirmed the route the investigators had reconstructed. Unfortunately, they still did not have enough evidence at that point to charge her. They continued collecting information while temporarily detaining her. They still lacked firm proof, such as witnesses or footage of the mother murdering her son. It seemed as if the perpetrator would be caught at any moment, but then a policewoman stationed in front of the school came forward, claiming she had indeed seen Veronica drop her child off that day. The investigators did not blindly trust their colleagues' words because they had the contradictory camera footage. Given that the suspect performed the same morning routine every day, the officer might have simply confused the date. At that time, the young mother was behind bars, vehemently protesting her innocence, but doubt had begun to grow. When the carabinieri told her husband about Veronica's lies regarding the route she supposedly took, he too found her behavior suspicious. The police felt this was the right moment to gather evidence. They knew the suspect trusted her husband, so they asked David to see her and try to get a confession or new information. Indeed, Veronica was the only person who had a coherent account of what happened that fateful morning. David agreed that it was a good idea. He said he did not want to condemn his wife. He only wanted to learn the truth for himself. He consented to speak with her privately, without wiretapping. On January 6, 2015, a month after the child's death, David visited his wife. According to Italian law, he technically had no right to be in the prison, but to solve the crime, an exception was made. The meeting was recorded by a prison camera. Veronica did not greet him. Her first question was whether he was carrying a microphone for a sting operation. He denied it and showed her he had nothing on him. Indeed, he had no device. They did not need one because the visit was filmed by prison cameras. The suspect continued to maintain she had nothing to do with the boy's death, sticking to her version of events. Veronica kept repeating the same story to the police, her lawyer, her husband, and her family when they visited her in prison that she had taken her son to school and had no idea what happened next. The investigators could not prove her involvement in the murder. Even her motive was in doubt. Everyone described her as a decent woman who sincerely loved her sons. Of course, there was malicious gossip, but all of it was checked by the investigators and found to be untrue. Veronica really did appear to be a caring mother. The only theory that made sense to the investigators was that she might have been suffering from depression or emotional instability. Indeed, the main suspect's severe depressive condition worsened during her time in prison. The investigation stalled, and soon a new approach emerged. The investigators decided to let the mother say goodbye at her son's grave, hoping it might reveal more information. Veronica was transported there with a convoy of 10 police cars with flashing lights, as if a dangerous madwoman were traveling through the city. A hidden microphone had been placed on the gravestone beforehand, because the officers were sure that if they left the mother alone with her deceased son, she might apologize or confess. Veronica did speak, but not in the way they had expected. She sobbed, prayed, and swore she knew who had done this to her son, and that she would see him punished. This was a complete surprise to the carabinieri. Then she was put back in the car and taken to her cell. At some point on the journey, the young mother said that being at her son's grave gave her a sort of epiphany, and now she remembered certain aspects of that day that she had not recalled before. Yet she refused to tell the investigators, and instead wanted to speak with her husband again. On November 6, 2015, her husband visited her once more. As before, the meeting was recorded by the prison cameras. This time, the main suspect admitted for the first time that she remembered not taking the boy to school at all on the day he disappeared. She said she found it difficult to talk about what happened and claimed she had been in an unusual state of mind. Veronica said that on that morning she had fallen out of reality, and it all felt like a haze. From fragments of memory, she gathered that she took her younger child to kindergarten and then went home, where Loris should have been. She had left him behind because her older son did not want to go to school that day. But when Veronica returned, she could not find him at home. In her confused state, she believed she had already taken him to school, and only realized her mistake when she went to pick him up at school and he was not there. The police did not believe the new version, but thought they were close to the confession they had been seeking for a year, to bring the murderer to justice. They saw her alleged memory loss as an attempt to shift blame away from herself and secure a lighter sentence than she deserved. Not everyone agreed, though, because her condition truly was alarming. Unfortunately, the younger child was too small to tell the police whether he had seen his brother that day. Although the Carabinieri were sure Veronica was involved in the murder, they played along and offered to take her home, hoping this might trigger new memories. They led her through the rooms exactly as they had been on the day of her son's death. When Veronica entered Loris's room, she began a theatrical display, speaking in her son's voice and reenacting the conversation they had that morning. Seeing how coldly she described the events, the investigators were convinced they were dealing with a pathological liar and manipulator, once again trying to steer the investigation away from the truth. But could she, who appeared in good health, have deceived everyone for over a year? Dozens of professionals had spoken to her in that time, yet no one had been able to detect the deception. Her lawyer believed she might genuinely suffer from some kind of psychological problem that made this possible. Finally, Veronica offered a new version of events that many people still believe today, though the police remain unconvinced it happened exactly as she says. According to her confession, Veronica came home from the kindergarten and began washing the baby's bottles. Her older son did not want to go to school, so she let him stay home all day. Loris was in his room while his mother did housework. She did not hear anything unusual, but at some point, she went to check on him and found his face already blue, with cable ties around his neck. He had been playing with them, trying to put them around his neck. They were connected like a necklace. According to her, his eyes were wide open in terror as he tugged on one end of the cable ties, thinking he could loosen them but actually pulling the noose tight. Veronica knew how they worked but realized they could not be torn by hand. She ran to the kitchen to grab scissors. When she came back and cut the fatal band, the boy showed no signs of life. He was unconscious and not breathing. She claimed she then had a panic attack, grabbed her phone and tried to dial emergency services, but she was shaking so badly that she could not hit the right button. The numbers blurred before her eyes. Then she became convinced that she would be blamed for what had happened, and in her incoherent state, she decided to get rid of her son's body. Later, forensic examinations confirmed that the boy's face and neck showed scratches resembling marks that might have been made by fingernails trying to pull the cable ties off. Unfortunately, they had been pulled so tight that it was impossible to tear them off by hand. Investigators believed that in her panic, the mother might have inadvertently tightened one of the cable ties, fully cutting off his oxygen supply. The police then wanted to clarify the details and possibly trigger more memories. That is why Veronica and David were taken again to the location where Loris's body had been found. There, the mother admitted throwing her son into the ravine, but continued to deny that she had killed him herself. She could not explain why the boy was missing his underwear, a fact that contradicted her story and aroused great suspicion. Why would an intelligent 8-year-old put these cable ties around his neck, keep pulling them tighter, and not even call for help? The suspect later recalled that the ravine was so deep that the boy's pants slid off by accident, causing him to twist around as he rolled to the bottom. During the trial, the prosecution tried to disprove the mother's confession, finding her uncharacteristic behavior more alarming than anything else. Veronica had backed her car into the garage in a highly unusual manner, supposedly to more discreetly load the body, all before she could have known her son was dead, based on her own testimony that he died later. In the prosecution's view, this suggested premeditated murder. The defense insisted that the mother had not killed the child, and that it was instead a tragic accident, with Veronica simply panicking once she realized the gravity of what had happened. In any case, she removed the body and disposed of it. One of the biggest unanswered questions is why she removed the boy's underwear. Veronica said she simply did not remember. The prosecution believed she wanted to create the appearance of a sexual assault to mislead the investigation. At first, her plan worked. The police were indeed looking for such a perpetrator, but they later realized it was all staged. During the proceedings, an unexpected twist occurred. Veronica claimed that the boy's paternal grandfather, Andrea Stivel, had scolded Loris. Allegedly, she had been having an affair with her husband's father. That day, the child caught them having sex and threatened to tell his father. So in a rage, the grandfather strangled him. Despite this bizarre development, the authorities had to investigate the defendant's claim. They reviewed surveillance footage and found no evidence that any man had entered the house that morning. In the video in which Veronica leaves the house around 9:30 a.m., a dark silhouette is visible in the back seat, but experts concluded it was simply the way light reflected off the car's windows, not a person. Andrea Stivel denied any connection to his grandson's murder and dismissed the allegation of an affair with his daughter-in-law as yet another lie from a disturbed woman. He had a confirmed alibi, and there was no correspondence or even phone calls between these supposed lovers. Nobody believed Veronica's new testimony. Her conduct indicated a mentally unstable person. Everyone who dealt with her, officers and specialists alike, remarked on her bizarre behavior. One of the investigators recalled that during an interrogation, she suddenly began to sing, and that her speech, sometimes calm or loud, would occasionally lapse into unintelligible mumbling and a vacant stare. It was as though Veronica would periodically slip out of reality and pretend to smoke an imaginary cigarette. The defendant's mother testified that Veronica had a history of psychological issues. She had reportedly been sexually abused by friends multiple times at a young age. At age 14, she tried to take her own life by drinking bleach after an argument with her schoolmates. The following year, she attempted to hang herself in a greenhouse. Veronica was treated at a psychiatric clinic. One day, she called her mother and asked her to take her away from there, saying a nurse had allegedly raped her, but this accusation could not be verified, and no one believed her. A psychiatric evaluation concluded that Veronica acted cold-bloodedly and calculatingly, with cruelty. It also showed that she did not have any serious mental disorders that would render her unfit to stand trial. The trial lasted 4 years, repeatedly adjourned and subject to additional investigations. In the end, she was found guilty of premeditated murder and of hiding the body. The judge sentenced her to 30 years in prison. Then another incident occurred. Apparently, the child's grandfather, whom Veronica had accused of the murder, was in the courtroom. Upset about the verdict, Veronica got up and accused him once more of the same absurd things she had been claiming earlier. She was removed from the courtroom and taken back to prison. To this day, Veronica remains in prison, keeping the terrible truth of how an 8-year-old boy died truth we may never fully know. Most of the investigators who worked on the case believe it was no accident but a planned, brutal murder. Presumably, her son did not want to go to school that day, as had happened before. An argument ensued, and in a fit of rage, She strangled him with cable ties, then disposed of the body and removed his underwear to derail the investigation. Because the cable ties were purchased in advance, it seemed all the more sinister and suggested premeditation. The father of the boy later said that his life was ruined overnight because he lost his son, his wife, and his job all at once. He still cannot believe Veronica really killed their child and wonders what reason there could have been. David had never seen his wife be violent toward their children. She had always been a caring mother. Now he tries to keep living for the sake of his younger son, whose upbringing his parents are helping with. Thank you for watching, and take care of yourself.